By default, the trace constant is enabled on both the debug and release profiles. To begin this lesson, open the Market Trader project from your sample files folder. And open the code behind file of site.master if it isn't open already. Now you're going to add some code that will display a message if the trace constant is present. Add the following code to the bottom of the page load event handler, outside the existing if directive. Label debug.text plus equals an HTML break tag and trace mode enabled. Next, you will need to add an if directive to compile the code only if the trace constant is present. Add the following code on a new line after the endIf directive, #if trace, and at the end of the page load event handler, add the code #endIf. Next, you're going to customize the release profile to disable the trace constant. First, make sure that Release is selected from the Build Profiles drop-down menu. Then right-click Market Trader in the Solution Explorer and click Properties from the shortcut menu. Now click the Build tab if it isn't selected already. Here you can see the checkboxes that enable and disable the debug and trace constants. You can also see the Conditional Compilation Symbols box, which allows you to define custom constants. You will learn more about creating custom constants in Lesson 6.4. Untick the Define Trace Constant checkbox now. The debug and trace constants are both now disabled in the release profile, but both remain enabled in the debug profile. You might be wondering if there's a difference between trace and debug. The trace and debug constants are simply values that are either present or not present. They become important when working with the system.diagnostics namespace. The system.diagnostics namespace behaves differently depending upon whether the trace and debug constants are present. You will work with the system.diagnostics namespace in Lesson 6.8. Now select Debug from the Build Profiles drop-down menu and test your code by clicking Debug, Start Debugging. Both messages appear in the top right corner because the debug profile defines both the debug and trace constants. Close your web browser now. Then select Release from the Build Profiles drop-down menu. Then click Build, Rebuild Solution, and click Debug, Start Debugging. You learned about rebuilding in Lesson 1.4. This time, neither message appears in the top right corner. Your if directives did not find the debug or trace constants, so the code within them was not compiled when the project was rebuilt. Close your web browser now and close Visual Studio. You've now completed Lesson 6.3. Use the if directive with the trace constant.